Chairman and members, Will Kempton, Director of the Department of Transportation. With me today is Bill Bronte, our Chief of the Division of Rail. And if we get into any technical questions, Mr. Bronte can assist me in answering those. Really appreciate the opportunity to appear before the committee today to talk about high-speed rail. But before I get into the substance of the hearing subject, Mr. Chairman, I would like to express appreciation to your staff and to the minority staff, Mr. Morley and Ms. Grass, for all of their help in trying to put together a bill that will allow us to get the federal stimulus dollars, at least for one of the programs, out the door more quickly. I hope we have a solution in hand at this point, and we'll be able to be talking about the substance of the bill.
Talking about the highway bill, the $2.7 billion, just like to announce that under the leadership, I think, of Mr. Kempton, all the stakeholders have come together to really say that the existing law that provided resources for California was really inadequate, that we needed some statutory changes which would get the money out, get it to those projects that were really needed, and to really respect the rights of the of local governments to really plan for themselves and to get that money out. And I too hope that that bill moves forward quickly.
We look forward to that. Kind of interesting about this element of the federal stimulus package, because as we were watching with bated breath for the final package to come out, we were not anticipating initially the size of the dollars that was included in the package for high-speed and intercity rail. So the reason for that, as we were told by Secretary LaHood, the new Secretary of the U.S. Department of Transportation, is that the President himself wanted to see a significant amount of money included in the stimulus package for high-speed rail. That bodes well for California, because I think once again we're beginning to take the lead on many transportation issues and clearly are ahead of other states when it comes to high-speed rail. So we really do appreciate the opportunity to talk to you today about the $8 billion that's contained in the federal stimulus package for intercity and high-speed rail. We are, as you indicated, Mr. Chairman, trying to bring all of the disparate groups that have an interest in seeking some funding through that rail stimulus program together, so that California can go to Washington with a single voice. Now, I don't know if that's possible, and the demands that we have far exceed even all of the federal dollars that are available. But I am hopeful, and we had a very positive meeting yesterday, attended by some of your staff, that we are able to pull that together in a way that California can, for the most part, speak in a consensus fashion with our delegation, and that will, I think, lend itself to a maximum return of these dollars to California. It's interesting to note that the stimulus package builds on the Passenger Rail Investment and Improvement Act, which was enacted last summer, and it included 3 new competitive grant programs. It included an intercity passenger rail grant program, which we've been pushing for years. The dollar amount in that grant program, by the way, is increased by the stimulus package, which is positive. It has congestion grants to facilitate ridership growth or to reduce rail congestion. And then, of course, the high-speed rail grants. And high-speed rail is defined in most circles as trains traveling at faster than 110 miles an hour. The stimulus legislation does provide $8 billion to fund those components through the competitive grant programs contained in the the Passenger Rail Investment and Improvement Act. The legislation, unfortunately, provides little guidance on distribution of the $8 billion beyond stating that the Secretary shall give priority to projects that support the development of high-speed rail service. There is also an emphasis on intercity passenger rail in 10 of the 11 designated high-speed rail corridors nationwide. Now, the Northeast Corridor, interestingly enough, is excluded from the 10 corridors, and all of California is designated under the federal program as a high-speed rail corridor. And although commuter rail is excluded from the $8 billion, we believe there are major opportunities to partner with the commuter rail agencies on shared corridors where we can develop projects that benefit intercity, commuter, and even high-speed rail service. We expect a lot of activity over the next several months, and in part because we're not as far along in terms of the guidance that has been provided by the Federal Rail Administration. By April 18th of this year, the FRA must submit a strategic plan to the House and Senate Appropriations Committee, and that plan is going to detail the following things: FRA's vision for developing high-speed rail services, the proposed schedule for providing grants under the Act, the criteria that will be used to evaluate grant applications, and we're waiting very impatiently for that, the reporting process that will measure and communicate program effectiveness, and the relationship of the ERA grant programs, and ERA is the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act, grant programs to the programs contained in the previous Rail Act. By June 17th of this year, the Federal Rail Administration must issue interim guidance to applicants covering grant terms, conditions, and procedures until final regulations are issued. There will be separate guidelines for each of the 3 grant programs, and this is where we have a problem in terms of the implementation side, Mr. Chairman and members, because we are not as far along with respect to those guidelines, and there are a lot of questions that still have to be answered. We do know that funds must be obligated by September 30th of 2012 and expended by February 16th, 2015. That represents 6 years following the date of enactment of the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act. At the staff level, we've been very active with FRA staff to develop an understanding of what we can expect to be required in the applications, and so we do have some anticipation of the kind of criteria that they will be looking for. First of all, we think they'll need an explanation of how the project fits into an overall plan or vision for a corridor, the project's projected ridership increase, the on-time performance improvements, the running time reduction or frequency increase primarily for the intercity rail projects, the methodology used to identify project need and how benefits will be measured, the project schedule and scope. Ready-to-go projects will obviously be a higher priority than those that still have engineering or environmental to complete, and then the probability that work can be completed and funded through the February 2015 date. And then also, we want to look at the employment impact, the economic stimulus benefits of any of these projects, just as we're doing on the highway side. So using these criteria, the work the Department has done to date to get projects ready to go, and the relationships we have developed with the host freight railroads and our commuter partners, and the extent to which our intercity rail corridors complement and feed into the high-speed rail system, we believe that California will be a major recipient of the $8 billion contained in the stimulus legislation. Normally, we can expect about 10% of any money that's made available through the federal government. If you look at the total made available for highways, $27 billion, California receives about $2.6 billion, just to illustrate that fact. I think that this is one program where California will be in position to gain a much larger share of those dollars. And we would should not lose sight of the fact that the administration has stated that it views the $8 billion as a down payment, I mean the federal administration, on the development of a nationwide passenger rail network, and has proposed as part of its federal fiscal year 2010 budget an additional $1 billion per year, and proposes $1 billion a year for the next 5 years for high-speed rail. So we're at a unique point in the development of transportation in California and really across the nation. The role of both high-speed and conventional rail as part of the state's transportation system is about to be changed dramatically. I think California, again, has been in the lead with respect to our approach to the intercity passenger rail service that we have in California. We have 3 of the most productive services in the country. That obviously puts us in a very good position to compete for the intercity passenger rail portion of these grants. We also have the approval by the voters of Proposition 1A last November, which clearly puts us in a very, very good position to help leverage additional federal dollars for high-speed rail in California. So I look forward to working with the legislature, with the High-Speed Rail Authority, and our other stakeholders as we work to improve passenger rail service across the board in the state of California.
Fine.
Mr. Kempton, you have some roots in my part of the state.
I do.
Do you have any thoughts about the issue that I raised at the outset?
It's 110 miles an hour.
We're taking a little good-natured ribbing from my colleague. I'm just going to move right past it. However, you have any insights about the issue I raised?
I think your point, Senator, was very well made, and I think the folks on the Commission and certainly the staff of the High-Speed Rail Authority understand that as well. When we constructed the freeways that we built as part of the program program you're referencing, we were very mindful of the public and the cities and neighborhoods through which our improvements were traveling. And it was only when we reached out to those folks and got their input that people became very comfortable. And as a result of that, I think we opened a new page in how to do business with respect to highway project development. And I would expect that the High-Speed Rail Authority will conduct their business in a similar way.
Just want to ask that you and your office do anything you can to make sure that does in fact happen.
We've already been in touch with the staff of the High-Speed Rail Commission, and I've heard from the chairman and some of the members of the authority. We stand ready to help in any way that we can. We certainly want to make this a success, and with the voter support, I think we have a good shot at making this a reality.
I'd like to clarify some of the definitions, because, you know, when we in California think of high-speed rail, we're talking, usually we think about the Bond project, and that's the project between Anaheim, Los Angeles, and the San Francisco and the Trans-Bay Terminal as the first phase. And we see it as trains in that go above 125 miles per hour, really. That's really what they're talking. And Caltrans is really kind of responsible for rail services of up to 125 miles. Yet, in the federal stimulus package, they define high-speed rail as 110 miles per hour or greater. Do we have other existing rail services that go 80, 90 miles an hour that we could bring up to that federal definition of high-speed rail also? Or are there others that we need to understand more that would also meet the federal definition of high-speed rail, which may be different than what we're talking about or what we've been accustomed to thinking in California is high-speed rail?
I don't think you're going to get, with the equipment and the condition of the facilities on which that equipment operates in California, that you're going to get much above a 110-mile speed. We have equipment right now that is capable of substantially higher speeds than under which we operate because of the limitations of the tracks. I mean, we're sharing the tracks with freight rail. This is primarily for our intercity rail service and for the commuter operations. We're sharing tracks in many cases, and so there's got to be some effective speed controls there. And then the tracks themselves simply will not accommodate as fast as some of these trains can go. You ride the Capitol Corridor, and there actually are segments of that service where we get up to about 70 miles an hour. 80 miles an hour, and it's hard to feel that when you're on the train, but the equipment is capable of going a lot faster than the tracks will allow us to proceed. So I think the definition, and this is the one that I've heard the most, regardless of how we are couching it in California, is really the cutoff is about 110 miles an hour. That's where you can get the Acela type service at speeds of that nature. The Acela is the service that's operated in the Northeast Corridor. And you know, if we can make significant improvements through Prop 1B investments and with these capital grants that are being made available through the federal stimulus package, we'll be able to upgrade significant portions of our existing system to accommodate those speeds in that range. Now, obviously, the high-speed rail service is talking about something well beyond that, and lends itself to the distance between Anaheim and the Bay Area. But I think we can do a lot to improve the service that we have here in California. Just one final example in closing, and the Low-San Corridor, the train that operates between San Diego and Los Angeles, currently takes something over 3 hours to make that trip. That does not compete favorably with the automobile. Whereas on the Capitol Corridor service, you can actually compete with the automobile, and in peak periods, you can beat the car by taking that train from Sacramento to the Bay Area. But we are working to improve the tracks in Los Angeles and through some of that corridor, so that by 2010 we will be able to make that trip in 2 hours and 10 minutes. That will allow, and these dollars will help us immensely in that effort, and that's the kind of objective we hope to achieve.
The other question I have is that those of us that live in California, I think which is everybody here, are acutely aware, I believe, of the fact that most of our, not all, we do have a lot of passenger rail service, as we pointed out, but much of our rail is freight now. You know, the major railroads that service California, whether it's the BNSF or the Union Pacific, have really focused on freight rather than passenger rail. And we heard at the last of our informational hearings on high-speed rail, this was before we passed the bond, that the High-Speed Rail Authority was trying to work out with the Union Pacific right-of-way issues. And there is some differences between the needs of passenger rail service and high-speed rail and freight, frequently using the same tracks and so forth. So can you tell us where we are now? I would imagine that part of your job is to bring all of these different folks together.
Well, and that's exactly what we're trying to do. But I don't think that the authority is proposing to actually use the same tracks. What they're proposing is to use the right-of-way. Right. And that obviously.
How is that going? Do you know?
You'll have to wait till Mr. Morshed comes up to ask him that. But I think that makes good sense that you would have a through rail line that, and in fact, if we ultimately get involved in grade separating that right-of-way, that could be beneficial to the freight railroads and to our intercity passenger rail operations as well. So I think that's certainly a prudent strategy to try to proceed. Whether they'll be successful in negotiating those kinds of arrangements with the private freight railroads is, of course, another story, but that will be a challenge.
Are we going to have a single application to the federal government?
It probably won't be single, Mr. Chairman, because there will be different programs, and each of the programs will have different grant applications. But what we will have is I hope, is a consensus package that we can say when high-speed rail or Caltrans or the ACE corridor or any of the other services actually makes an application, they can say, and we'll put together some sort of a booklet or whatever that includes the California consensus, and they'll be able to reference that it is part of the California consensus, whether it's the Transbay Terminal, high-speed rail, or whatever.
Thank you. Other members, any other questions? Thank you. That was very helpful.
Thank you.